Good evening. Today is February 10th. Um, I am currently still in Roswell. Uh, uh, but as some of you know, if you watched some of my other shorts, well, this won't be a short, but I recently went out to the Azusa Street prayer tower and was blown away by the presence of God. And I just want to kind of open up a little bit. Again, if you watched, some of my videos, you know that I did uh, almost 9 years in prison. And, about 2 weeks before I got locked up, I was sitting in McDonald's and I had Googled my name and a picture of a big black guy with my same name showed up, and it was his mugshot. And for those of you that know my name, you know that there's probably no black people with my last name. Um, so there's barely any white people. But, and I remember looking at that and saying, Lord, I could never go to prison, jail. I don't think I could make it a couple days. And little did I know that was a warning from God. 2 weeks later, I was arrested. And so I got a phone call that morning, November 30th, 2011. My mom had been in a car wreck, and we were at the body shop to see if they could fix the car. And I got a phone call, and it was a detective, and we got to talking, and things didn't make sense to me. But I was concerned. And so we had an agreement that I would go meet him at 2:30, that it would take an hour. So then I could pick up my kids from the bus stop. And it was my last time seeing them before I moved up to North Dakota, because this was when that big oil boom was, and I had gotten a job up there. So I was going to pick them up that day and take them out to eat. I had their Christmas presents in the trunk of my car. And when I hung up the phone with him, I asked my friend a question, and she didn't know the answer. So I looked, and when I saw what the answer was, I really freaked out. And this was at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I left my mom there at the body shop and went straight to the detective because I was genuinely concerned. And so I got there 4 hours early, and here I am not thinking anything about anything. And I told him everything. I was naive. I was not expecting what happened. And so for about 3.5 hours, I told him everything. Didn't hold nothing back. Didn't see any reason to. And about 2 o'clock, about 3.5 hours in, he told me what was really going on. And, looking back now, I would have done it different. But I didn't know. I hadn't been in trouble. I didn't, I just knew what I saw on TV. And if you went in, talked to them, cooperated, proved that you weren't around and stuff like that, then you go home. It's not how it works in the real world. So he spent about 30 minutes telling me the other side of the story. And I had him get my phone, and I showed him, and blah, blah, blah. And we went through all that, and he still arrested me. So I asked for a lie detector test, which you don't get. I mean, that's super rare. But this is how looking back, I see that God's hand was in on this. Here I was leaving. Okay. So I lived in Wichita and I was leaving. I was moving to North Dakota. I wasn't going to church. I wasn't doing anything that I had been called to do. And not that going to church is what saves you. So if you watch my other videos, you understand. But I wasn't doing what he had called me to do. So the day I got arrested, I was leaving that weekend, like I said, to move to North Dakota. And they had given me 40 days on, 10 days off. So for 40 days I'd work, and then for 10 days they would pay my way back down here to Wichita, or there to Wichita. And I would get to see my kids and do all that and then go back up. Well, so I got arrested, and then I had the proof, had all this, asked for the lie detector test. Never thought in a million years it would be granted. And the next day the detective came to the jail. Oh, and also by me going in at 2:30 or at 10:30 and then booking me in the jail at 2:30, it put me in a dorm and in a cell, a maximum security cell by myself, with only 12 other guys in the pod. So when we got to come out, there was only 12 of us. So, and that was God. That was God. But when I got into that cell, there was a Bible sitting on the desk. And that first night and the second night, I saw the Bible sitting there, and I said, God, I don't know why you let this happen, but leave me alone. The next day I went, took the lie detector test. I walked in, the detective that administered the test, she was a female, and she looked at the big old detective that had arrested me. And mind you, I'm 6'2", 260 pounds, and he made me look tiny. So she asked him, well, why is he shackled up? And he said, well, he's in custody. And she said, I don't care. He's harmless. Unshackle him. And that made me feel at peace. And so he unshackled me, and her and I sat down and started talking. And again, I told her everything, and she said, okay. She said, that's different than what I was told. And she said, but I still don't understand why you're in here getting a lie detector test. And I told her what I had been arrested for. And she about lost it. She's like, no, it's not what I was told. She said a whole different stories being told. And in the end, 4 different stories were told. Mine's the one that held true. But I had, during that process, when I told them everything, I did not realize some things that were against the law. And so anyways, when it was all said and done, I passed a lie detector test. They dropped the bad charge. And I eventually pled guilty to what I actually did, and that was talking on Facebook. So there's a lot of stigma with men's mental health and different things. And it was a really tough time in my life. I think I was at the lowest I had ever been when I was arrested. And I came back to my cell, and like I said, I told God that night, same thing. I don't want nothing to do with you. And for those of you that don't know, I was raised oneness, apostolic, Pentecostal, no facial hair, no shorts, no t-shirts, no TV. Women can't cut their hair, wear jewelry, can't wear pants, we couldn't go to the racetrack, even though we walked by it. Most of the few years I lived in Colby, we walked by it because we didn't have a car most of the time. One time it shattered the glass on our screen door. We lived so close to the racetrack, but we weren't allowed to go. I was very athletic. I was very good at basketball. You can ask anybody that knows me. But I wasn't allowed to play, so I wasn't able to hone my skills and potentially go somewhere with it. Um, so I was just in a really bad spot, and I don't know when or what happened, honestly, because the next thing that I remember from county jail is I was leading Bible studies. I didn't go to any of the call outs. I don't remember when I started reading the Bible and praying. I remember that second night saying that, and honestly, my memory is completely blank up until I was doing Bible studies. And I had put my life into God's hands somehow. I didn't repeat no prayer. There was nothing at this point, anyways. There was nothing huge. There was nothing mind blowing. There was nothing supernatural that I could see, but the supernatural had happened inside of me. So, of course, I'm still teaching these oneness doctrine and the rules and the regulations and all of that. And I would always hear this man had come back. No, he had only come back from prison to be resentenced on another charge, and he had believed God that he was going to get it ran concurrent with his time that he was currently serving, because he was doing everything that God had asked him to do. He was leading Bible studies in prison, starting programs, reunited with his kids, like everything was going good. And he was believing that that's what would happen. And he actually had my same attorney. So, but I remember every night I would hear him up in his room praying in tongues, and this is not going to be a debate on if tongues are real or not. Okay, I'm going to say they are. I will say that I believe they are misused a lot. But every night he'd be up there praying. And one night I was like, you know what? I'm calling him out, because that ain't how this works. You can't do that. He's fake, because of the way I'd been taught. That's what I believed. So the next day he came down, and I called him out, and I said, how do you do it? Why? You're fake. And he said, man, brother, he's like, I see your heart for God and for people. He said, but you're a little misguided. And he said, I want to do something with you. He's like, I'm going to pray for you. And when I'm done, don't say anything. God's going to talk to you, and then we'll just go from there. So he prayed for me. And in my mind, out loud, I said, okay. But in my mind, I was like, God ain't going to talk to me, blah, blah, blah. Right. So I was still in that religious mindset. And so he prayed for me, and I stayed quiet when he got done. And 3 times I heard, forget everything you've learned and follow me. Forget everything you've heard and follow me. Forget everything you've learned and follow me. As soon as he finished the 3rd time, this brother said, what did he say? And I said, well, how did you know he was done? He said, well, he told me he was. Well, I couldn't argue with that. I just was mind-blowing that God would actually care enough to have a personal relationship with me like that, especially sitting in the Sedgwick County Jail. So that's what I did. I forgot everything I learned, and I would spend 8-10 hours a day reading my Bible, praying, studying, writing down scriptures, and God started just opening stuff up to me so quickly. And I quickly went from believing the oneness doctrine to the Trinity doctrine, and then I didn't understand the Trinity doctrine, and so God started explaining it to me. And Trinitarians believe in one God. Tritheism is the belief in 3 separate gods. Okay, so for anybody that doesn't realize that, research it, study, talk to people. So anyways, so he just started doing that. Well, Meanwhile, I still hadn't gone to a church service or anything yet. And I woke up one morning and I was looking for my brother, and they said, oh, he's still at sentencing. And I was like, oh, okay. So when he came back, I was in the room and I looked down and I saw him standing at the door waiting for the guard to let him in. And he was smiling so big, and I literally saw a white glow around him. And I was like, wow, this man got what he prayed for. And so I had the guard pop the door. I go down. I said, hey, brother, what's going on, brother? What's the good news? I said, I saw that white light around you and that big smile. He said, oh, man, brother. He said, God is good. I said, yes, he is. He said, I got 7 more years, run consecutive. And I about lost it. I said, brother, how can you be so happy? I said, you really just got 7 additional years. He said, yeah. I said, how can you be so happy? He said, because this is God's life. He's living through me. He said, I'm just a missionary. This is what he's got me doing. So I'm cool. I know that God's going to take care of my family if I just obey him. Wow. Wow. Just blew my mind. A couple days later, he was gone. I didn't see him again for many years. But so I'm in county, and I had got myself moved upstairs into a corner room. We were doing sandwiches 2 meals a day at the time because they were remodeling the kitchen. And so they shook us down, and we had a little mustard pack about this big that come with our sandwiches. Well, I hate mustard, but I kept one as a sign of mustard seed faith. Well, they shook down my room, found it, and they locked me down for 24 hours. Same punishment you get, or at the time, that you would get for having something more dangerous than a pack of mustard, if you know what I mean. So I was sitting there eating a cookie, and before I started eating, I was like, well, Lord, apparently there's a reason why you want me stuck in my room for 24 hours, because I've had this thing for a couple months and they've never said anything. So there must be a reason. I was learning to realize that there was a purpose behind everything. And so I sat down and I had bit into a cookie, and all of a sudden I just started crying. I didn't know why. And so I stood up, raised my hands, and just started praying to God, and it was all in English. I understood everything I was saying. That went on for a while, then I went to sleep. Well, the next morning when I got off lockdown, one of the brothers says, man, dude, God got a hold of you last night up in your room, didn't he? And I said, yeah, he sure did. He said, man, you were just up there speaking in tongues for a long time. And I said, no, I wasn't, brother. I said, I was speaking in English the whole time. I heard everything I was saying. And he said, no, brother. He said, you were speaking in a heavenly language. And a couple of the other guys said, yeah, you were. And I kind of blew it off, but I was still kind of like, man, all right, so how does this work? I'm still in the forget everything I learned and follow him. So I think it was about a month later. I'm reading a book. I don't remember the book. I don't remember who wrote it, but he talked about he had an experience like that. And so I knew, okay, there's precedence for this. And so I got shipped out of county, did Bible studies there. Anyways, came back Mother's Day 2012. So I'd been locked up 5.5 months. I'm in my room, and I'm over in C-section. And I just got back from out of county. I didn't really know anybody in that section. So but I was in my room. I listened to some preaching. It wasn't anything that like moved me. So I was going to take a nap at 11 o'clock. When the preaching was over, I was going to take a nap before we got our lunch at noon. So I laid down to take a nap, and all of a sudden I just start crying. And I was like, okay, well, this is weird. Now this had happened back in February or 1st of March of 2012 in my room. So I was like, okay, well, this is kind of weird, but all right. So I got up, blew my nose, wiped my eyes, laid back down, started crying again. So I just got on my knees and I said, Lord, I don't know what's going on. And I said, Holy Spirit, I don't know what to say. You're going to have to pray for me. And in tongues for 45 minutes, I just spoke in tongues. And then for 15 minutes, I was singing in tongues. I would try to speak in English and I couldn't. So when I was done, I had tears everywhere, burgers everywhere. I mean, I was a mess, but I felt so good. And the night before, every time I would close my eyes while laying in my bunk, I saw myself behind a pulpit, and it was always a different pulpit. And when I started living for God, I had told him, Lord, I'll do anything you want me to do except two things. I don't want to preach and I don't want to write a book about my life. And those were the two things that he asked me to do that night. And I said, yes, I'll do it. Well, the next morning is when all of this happened to me. So that started a journey that I went pretty strong on. I went to prison, and everywhere along the way, I saw God's hand. There was always somebody to witness to, somebody he would bring into my cell. He'd send me to a county. Sumner County at the time was great. You could switch rooms whenever you wanted, and we could go into rooms and do Bible studies. And because there were so many people downstairs that wanted to watch their TV and cuss and scream, the Bible study guys, we'd go into my room. We'd have about 6 or 8 of us sitting on the floor, my bed, the toilet, the sink, and we're doing Bible study. And we would do this every day I was there in Sumner County. And it was just an amazing experience. But I knew that I was going to get probation. I knew it. God had showed me. And I knew what the levels were going to be. I knew everything. And my attorney kept telling me I was stupid, wasn't going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And then they offered me a plea, and I thought about taking it. I went to church. I did not tell anybody what had happened. So at this time, I was going to call outs, pretty regularly. And God was using me in the gifts of the Spirit. But I didn't tell anybody. And I went in, the pastor of the service, who is at this time now in 2026, she's the chaplain of Sedgwick County. I walked in, and I don't know what she saw or anything, but she's like, you need to sit up here with me. And so I sat behind her on the big chair, and afterwards she prayed with me, and she got a word of knowledge from the Lord, and he said, do not take the plea. Stand on the promises I made you. Do not take the plea. And so I determined in my mind at that time I was not going to take the plea. Well, my attorney, who is now a ADA, so we can, do the math there. But we decided to go to trial, and when the day before trial, they brought me the plea, and it was the same plea. And she's like, you're not going to get any better, blah, 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 blah. And she's like kind of raising her voice a little bit at me, kind of sharp with me. And I'm shackled. And mind you, I'm scared, and I'm crying. I'm like, this isn't what I saw. This isn't what I saw. Lord, this isn't what you said. And she's just like, you need to take it. You need to take it. You need to take it. And I was like, no, this isn't it. And we're back and forth. And so I was praying, and I had the pen in my hand. I said, God, if this is not what you want me to do, please stop me. Please give me a sign, something. And I got nothing. And I signed it real slow. Then I still believed, though, that even though it was a plea for 10 years that I could get probation. And so I still just stood. Well, I got 122-month sentence and it rocked me to the core. It rocked me, and I didn't understand, like, why. And you'll go through big trials to test your faith, and the Bible talks about that he has no portion with those that lose faith. You get weak under pressure. And so if we shrink back with our faith, then the promises aren't guaranteed anymore. So he had showed me what he was going to do, but then when I was faced in the physical realm of seeing the plea and seeing and hearing, I was kind of like Peter. I got my eyes off of Jesus and I looked at the storm, and I felt that the only way to take care of the storm was to just sign the plea and say, okay, God, it's still yours, do your thing. But I was in disobedience in taking the plea, and my family, rightly so, they're like, oh, this whole time you said you're not going to take the plea, you're not going to blah, 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 and you're not going to prison, and look, here you are. And so, yeah, it hurt. I felt like I let God down, I let my family down, I let myself down, because I thought I was stronger than that, even though I'd only been serving God for a little over a year. But so I'm going to stop this here in a minute. I'm going to stop. And so anyways, I believed for probation and everything. And so it was January 25th. I signed my plea. March 6th, I go in for sentencing. We didn't even have sentencing scheduled that day. But I got woke up, said I had court. I said, no, I don't. And I figured it was child support court. So I throw my sandals on and brush my teeth, and I go down there, and they escort me to court. And I'm like, what's going on? And they said, well, you're being sentenced today. And I was like, no, I'm not. And they said, yes, you are. They changed it. So I go into outside the courtroom, and my attorney's there, and I was like, what's going on? She's like, well, we got the results back from your test, and you're going to go home today. You're getting probation. And I got so excited. But then something hit me on the inside, and I got this check in my spirit, and I knew I was going to prison. I hadn't even been in the courtroom yet, but I knew I was going. But in my mind, I still just, thank you, Lord, I'm going home. That's what I'm saying. But in my heart, I knew. Sure enough, we go up in front of the judge. And the night before, I forgot about this. The night before, a brother woke up a little after midnight and came to me, and he said, hey, man, I've been praying that God would use me through this situation. He said, I got a word for you. He's like, I saw a vision of you standing in the courtroom, and there was nobody behind you. When you turn around, there's nobody behind you. He said, there's nobody beside you. He said, but God wants me to tell you that no matter what happens in that courtroom, he's there. And he's got a plan. And I told him, I said, well, brother, that's not the case. I mean, I had 8 or 10 preachers that were coming. All my family was coming, my mom, dad, I think my sister. I would have had a courtroom full of people. Like I said, about 8 or 10 preachers. And he said, well, brother, I'm just telling you what I saw. And I said, okay. He said, and then he explained about something that he saw going in the future about restoration to a female in my life. And it was my daughter. And so I held on to that. And now we are reunited. But so anyways, I go into the courtroom, and as soon as I walked in, and I'm still saying that, I look, and there's nobody there. And his words from the night before hit me even harder. And then I remember that he said, no matter what happens. And then with that check in my spirit a few minutes before that. So sure enough, I was sentenced to 122 months for simply having an inappropriate conversation on Facebook. Now, what I did was wrong. Talking to anybody inappropriately is wrong. If they're not your wife, your girlfriend, whatever. I want to make that clear. Okay? I did not do anything with anybody sexual, and that was all proven. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm not justifying anything. I'm just making it clear that no matter what may be said about me, there's several hundred pages of court documents that show the different stories that were being told and all of that, and that how mine stayed the same. So, but so I'm fixing to end here. When I got out of sentencing, a guard who I thought was pretty rude. She was always mean to us, but I guess when you do that job for as long as she had been treated the way she was, you'd be a little stern as well. So, I came out and she said, "Oh, what happened? What happened?" She's like, "You're going home, aren't you?" And I said, "No." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "They gave me 10 years. And she said, "Well, what about your kids?" And that's when I lost it and started crying. She hugged me right there in the hallway. And then she sent an email out to all the guards letting them know to talk with me and look out for me because I had just been sentenced to 10 years. And mind you, a lot of the guards knew me because I was always doing Bible studies. I was always going to church every day and so they knew me. They knew what I stood for and I respected them and all of that. So then guards just started coming up to me. They come into the pod just to see me and see how I'm doing. And so I just saw the support and the love of, law enforcement. They're not all rude and pricks, Some genuinely do care. There's always bad apples in every batch. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast, as they say. But I had so many of them. And then I got shipped back out to Sumner County while waiting to be shipped out. And they were the same way there. And it was amazing. One of the guards let me be in the gym for several hours when it was only supposed to be an hour. He said, "I'll just forget about you." And I saw God's hand every step of the way. But little did I know really just how much it was just beginning. This will be the end of part 1.